Story 1. Cast iron sewer lines. I am a service plumber and work on lots of downtown buildings in Kansas City. Once office buildings opened up again after COVID and people started coming back to work, a lot of cast iron drain sewer lines that are inside walls and above the ceilings were halfway clogged from rust due to not being used and the inside of the pipe drying up, which quickly became fully clogged when used again. This kept me busy for quite a while. Story 2. Boots and shoes with polyurethane soles. Discovered this after pulling my hiking boots out of the closet after a 5-year hiatus. The soles disintegrated after 2 kilometers. Story 3. As I learned this year, dishwashers. According to my ex, who was the last person to use it, not regularly running water over the rubber gaskets can cause them to split. This is allegedly why my dishwasher became a tub of moldy, brackish water for weeks before flooding my kitchen with gross soup. I am not a plumber. Story 4. A relationship. Take that seriously. For granted, start running on autopilot and not putting any thoughts or effort into it, and you will be breaking up sooner than you think. Story 5. Bones. Putting stress on your bones produces more osteocytes, which makes your bones stronger. Osteocytes are what make up the outer part of your bones. People who are more sedentary have a higher risk of breaking a bone because they are just weaker. Also, the older you get, the fewer osteocytes you produce naturally. Strength training or some form of weight-bearing activity is amazing for elderly people and reduces the risk of breaking bones from falls. Story 6. Toilets constantly have to replace the flappers and seals in toilets in our vacation house, which dry out and stick when underused. Don't have that problem at home. Story 7. Your life. Hide away from the world and never leave your house, and you will become a broken, lonely person unless that really suits you. It doesn't for most, and most aren't alone by choice. Story 8. Oddly specific, probably, but mechanical filters for fish tanks. They would run fine nonstop for years, but if I put them in storage for a few months, they would never start up again. I started getting sponge filters because just a sponge and the air pump do not seem to care how long they have been sitting. Story 9. Air conditioners. I live in San Francisco, and every year for 2 or 3 days we reach the upper 90s. Every 3 years or more we hit 100 degrees for a day. 90% of the time we live in 50 to 70 degrees. So, if you buy an air conditioner, you may only turn it on briefly every couple of years. It sits there, the vents collect insects, dust, and whatever else, and when you do turn it on, after 45 minutes it bursts into flames. Story 10. I discovered this one recently, and the timing was very poor too. Handicap scooter batteries will completely fail if you don't charge and use them frequently. I took my client to an air show 3 hours away and messed up when I couldn't move her anywhere because the scooter battery was extremely dead. Story 11. Math. I know some people who took gap years after graduating from high school only to do poorly in math placement tests before California banned remedial courses. Story 12. Cars, apparently. We replaced an old car we had when we had more children, so it sat in our driveway for a couple of months. It had worked perfectly fine before, but had all sorts of problems afterward. Story 13. Communication skills can really deteriorate if you do not use them regularly. It is surprising how quickly you can lose the ability to hold engaging conversations or articulate thoughts clearly without actively practicing speaking and interacting with others. Story 14. Inkjet printers, which is why I always buy toner printers. I've had the same toner cartridge for about 5 years, and it still works fine the 2 to 3 times per month that I print something. Story 15. Muscles. After retiring from 32 years in the Army, I was so glad never to have to run, do sit-ups or push-ups again. 5 years later, with the atrophied contractures hurting, it took a year to recover. I still don't like them, but do them anyway. Story 16. A foreign language that isn't your first language. I learned Spanish in high school, and I remember some of it. Later in life, I worked with sisters who were born and raised in Portugal. I picked up enough from them in the office that I knew what they were talking about, and I could more or less answer them. After I left that job, I lost a lot of the Portuguese phrases I had learned. Story 17. Your brain needs stimulation. Being complacent with it and not exercising it through books, games, exercise, meditation, and work will eventually lead to loss of mental sharpness. Please note, I am not an expert. Story 18. Boat outboards, especially big two-strokes. I used to service outboards, and at least 3/4 of the work was just getting them running again after sitting all winter because some moron didn't winterize them. They will lock up just from sitting, and because the chromeline cylinders are so sticky, you can break rings trying to turn them over using the starter, which makes the job exponentially more expensive. The carburetors also get gummed up very quickly, and that job gets pretty expensive when you have 6 of them on something like a 225 variable ratio oiling. If you have a boat with a 2-stroke outboard, always run stabilizer, and always use a quality 2-stroke oil. When it starts getting cold and you don't know when you will be on the boat next, run the carburetors dry, pull all the plugs, fog the cylinders, put the plugs back, and turn it over for a second. This will save you a lot of money in the long run. Story 19. The seal between the tank and the lower half of the toilet. If you do not flush for months, that seal will dry out, so when you do flush it, a bunch of the water will go onto the floor. Story 20. Language. I managed to almost entirely forget my mother tongue because I wasn't using it or being exposed to it for 3 years. I'm still working to get it back even now. Story 21. Your body. Sedentarianism equals a slow death. My original response was, your willpower and motivation is a train that's got to keep chugging. That isn't to say you can't take breaks or that the train can stop at stations, but if you don't keep the gears well oiled or the furnace fueled, it will be a lot harder to get it where it needs to go to get refueled later. Story 22. I didn't have the oil changed in my car for the 2.5 years I worked remotely because I thought, why bother? I barely drive it. All the oil turned to sludge. I learned a valuable lesson. Story 23. Apparently, the clutch in my Gator. The darn thing cost me about $800 to replace, and all the John Deere representative said was, you have to use these daily, or they go. Story 24. People don't believe this, but anything with a motor needs regular attention. Billionaires who collect cars actually hire individuals to ensure their vehicles are run regularly. If you have any car sitting in the garage or a motorcycle, make sure to turn it on once a month and drive it around the neighborhood. Story 25. As I understand it, electrolytic capacitors benefit from being energized once in a while. They work by having a very thin layer of aluminum oxide that forms the insulation between the aluminum foil anode and electrolyte cathode. Applying the right polarity of voltage builds up the oxide layer. Applying the reverse voltage, on the other hand, causes the oxide layer to break down, which can result in an electrical short. That's why electrolytic capacitors can blow up if you install them backward. Story 26. I'm going to say your brain. I'm 53 now, and I can feel the decline since I stopped working in an engineering research and development environment. The pressure to stay sharp is less now, and in lockstep, so has my ability to be sharp declined. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't a legend, but I built some neat stuff that I look back at now and wonder how I ever did it. Story 27. Me with stress. I used to be so accustomed to overworking myself or just staying busy to enhance my resume in my youth. I spent a summer to myself, not working crazy hours, and now I suddenly have forgotten to go back on the grind. That, or maybe burnout has finally caught up to me. Story 28. Your brain. Look at any movement or enterprise that does your thinking for you or tells you what to think so you do not have to think it for yourself. Story 29. I did work years ago that involved being in a coal-fired power plant. Our guide took us into the main room where the whole operation comes to a head. This room housed a big steam turbine connected to a big electric motor-looking thing about the size of an old Volkswagen Beetle. I'm not educated on this stuff, so excuse the layman's terms. What was interesting to me was we were told that even if the plant wasn't making power that day, they had to use a little bit of power to keep the motor turning slowly because it would ruin it if it completely stopped. The thing that essentially energized. Story 30. Airplanes are engineered to hang from their wings. The forces on the plane completely reverse when they sit on their landing gear. Fluids pool in reservoirs and pans. Nitrogen leaks through seals. The interiors get extremely hot sitting in the sun, which degrades polymers and composites. Planes simply fall apart over time if they sit on the ground. Story 31. Hiking shoes. The damping part of the soles in most hiking shoes consists of a material that needs to be pressed and relaxed by walking to stay flexible. I have seen dissolving souls a couple of times. Story 32. Your body. Lethargy all by itself is a disabling injury. I believe the standard recommendation is for 150 minutes of exercise per week. That's 30 minutes 5 days per week as a bare minimum to prevent the deterioration of your physical capabilities. Add time to that if you want to improve your body's physical capabilities.